All right. So, Berto, um, I guess let's start with a little bit of an intro. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Uh, I'm Berto. I've been playing cards for quite a while now. I uh, have had some competitive success in the game, and more recently, I've transitioned more towards commentating the game. Uh,
Oh,
yeah.
you did very well last Worlds, right? What did you place again?
Uh, well, I was one game away from making it into the winner's side of top six.
Ah, okay.
Um,
That's still really
I'm not.
impressive though.
Yeah, thanks.
Um, and did you play? I know like you were one of the pre-seeded players for this year's Worlds, right? So like you had to play a lot of, you had to like win a lot of or not win, but like you had to place well in OCC games to do that, right?
Well, I actually pre-qualified by playing in last year's Worlds where I got
Ah,
third
okay,
place.
all right. Um, but you've had a fair amount of experience playing in OCC, right?
Yeah.
All right, so Berto knows what he's talking about when it comes to cards. So today, I guess let's give the overview. So I'll try to get your thoughts on the meta in ladder and in competitive play right now, and try to get your thoughts on my decks, and maybe maybe I'll play a couple of games, and you can like point out if you think I'm doing something that's a bit suboptimal. Then we got a special deck building challenge towards the end, and then if we have time, we'll get your thoughts on like on one topic that I've been curious about is other people's opinions on unfun archetypes such as discard, KD, resistance, and we'll get your thoughts on your favorite cards and archetypes in general if we
Alrighty.
have time. All right, so let's start with the meta then. What would you say the meta is like right now?
I'd say the meta sort of revolves around Jagro, um, sort of the deck that keeps other decks in check. And if you're not able to play against Jagro, then you're not able to really play at all. And I think a large part of that comes from the insane power level of Aichi.
Okay, yeah. So I've seen a fair amount of US mid-range as well as Soviet control. And Soviet control, I'm assuming, is kind of response to Jagro and US mid-range.
Yeah, particularly Bryansk Irregulars and Petliakov and Bloody Sickle are
Hmm.
all incredible cards against US midrange and Jagro.
Right. So one question I wanted to ask is that I feel like I've not seen self-damage a lot on the ladder, like at all, and not too much in competitive play either. And I thought, like in theory, it has decent matchups into Jagro and US mid range. Although, of course, if Jagro high rolls with their IG package, it's game over. But most of the time, I feel like it should at least be decent. So why haven't we been seeing like that much self damage?
I'd say because uh, I mean Aichi is just so good against self-damage that the win rate against Jagro is maybe like a 60-40, which is still good for self-damage.
Hmm.
But the thing is that when the deck so hard loses to other stuff like discard or control decks, it's just not worth bringing it if it's not absolutely crushing Jagro.
Fair enough. The win rate against other decks doesn't justify um, the deck being run overall. And I mentioned this a little bit previously. So one new, very interesting kind of hybrid deck archetype that I've seen in competitive play that kind of came up recently is like this, hybrid deck archetype that combines elements of aggro, mid-range control, even combo with burst of fire and like comet. So, can you give us your thoughts on like this deck archetype?
So I think it's really cool. I find the running of Suffering Plan maybe a little bit dubious because it's really hard to find the turn where you're able to expend 4 credits against something like Jagro, and
Hmm.
not just lose on the spot when you're still playing it early enough that the card is relevant. Um, so I'm not sure about that. I've kind of preferred the version that just goes for the air superiorities and a burst of fire or two. Um, but I do recognize the strength of the Severn plan. It can really blow out some control matchups. Um, and so I do see the value there. It's just how I was saying, like you sort of have to build everything around Jagro, and I feel like Suffering Plan particularly is weak into Jagro.
Definitely. Yeah, even against US mid-range, especially if you're going second, I've found that it's just very awkward to find a time where you can play it without just getting your face blown up. Um, yeah, all right, interesting. And would you say that there's like any decks that haven't been mentioned that we should maybe watch out for potentially?
Um, well, and not that I can think of off the top of my head. Um, I I did find a lot of success with Mobilize in the Worlds um, qualifier.
Oh, right,
And
that's one deck I wanted to mention. So thanks for bringing that up. Um, so like,
s-
do you think? Sorry, no, go ahead.
oh, I see you got the nice double East Surrey tech here. I found that really helpful just to stabilize in the early game. Because if you're able to stabilize with this deck against something like Jagro, you're really able to turn the corner and heal for so much. It gives a pretty good win rate into Jagro if you're experienced on the deck. It can be a little hard to play into things like US Frontline, so it's not the meta solver or anything, but it's a nice little
So
deck.
funny you mentioned that because I definitely do feel like it does struggle against US frontline. Although, at least in competitive, it seems like people have been swapping out, what's it called, Stars and Stripes for Eagle Claws. So that is significant against, I would say, Mobilize since it won't kill Potezes and any like buffed, you know, regiments. One of these 73 Es might even survive. And I'm not sure. Have players even been cutting strategic bombing?
I don't think I've seen anybody cut strategic bombing.
Okay. So is the reason for that, as you mentioned, like just playing, building around Jagro, like having an answer to like I Cheese and the German 2-1 guy that draws if you have a front line, stuff like that.
Also, Martyr particularly
Martyr, right?
um, is it can Martyr can be really hard to deal with in the backline, and Eagle Claws is just one of the things that can deal with it without drawing your opponent additional cards at the same time, which is really valuable.
There. And type 93, right?
Yeah.
All right. So would you say like there's any noticeable differences in general between like the top of the ladder um, versus competitive play?
Um, I mean, it's just that you're forced to play more stuff, right? Like, top of ladder, there's a ton of Jagro. Um, at least last month there was. I haven't played too much this month.
Hmm.
Um, but nothing has changed in terms of the card pool or anything or balance.
Right.
So I would suspect it's still pretty similar. Um, so I mean, the difference is that we see all these decks that you're pulling up and talking about, rather than just Jagro
Right.
as like 50% of decks, and then generally players who uh, aren't as close to the top and are maybe playing for different reasons than trying to, get top six, are playing decks that are sometimes a lot wackier, like Soviet IS-2 printer or ramp or stuff that doesn't really fit into the meta right now, but people just find fun.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Um, all right, so I guess let's have you review some of my decks and give your thoughts on them. And by the way, like you be completely honest. Like if you think it's garbage, like just say interdiction. This is trash. I don't know how you made it out of rank 20 with this. Like be completely honest, okay? So like one thing I've tested with credit denial is just removing what's that thing called Observer Core for 24th Cavalry because I feel like 24th Cavalry actually slots in decently into credit denial because it gives you an answer to like early 2 health and 3 health units that credit denial kind of struggles to deal with. And against like control decks, you can apply pressure to their face with this. Maybe like eat some removal that would have been taken by a honey, like maybe eat some German countermeasures, sudden strikes, whatever. What are your thoughts on that?
Um, it's an interesting strategy. I mean, I haven't seen this deck play at all. Um,
Yeah, I think credit denial
but
just completely like fell. Like there's nobody playing it anymore after the Observer Core nerf.
yeah, there is something to be said about, you know, uh, playing with a little more consistency when you're not going for the absolute high roll of Observer Core into Southern Plan or Daylight Bombing. Um, because, Observer Core does put you down a card just for, 1 credit or 2 credits, sort of depending on when you get to use it.
Hmm.
So I can see the advantage there versus the old deck, but just because credit denial wasn't meta warping when it could do more broken things, it makes me wonder if there is much of a point to trying to build credit denial after it's lost what is overpowered about the deck.
Fair enough. Yeah, I completely agree. Personally, I just like playing unfun archetypes. So, these are actually the 3 decks that I brought to groups, and I barely didn't make it out of groups, unfortunately, at 3rd place. I
uh,
definitely could have played better. I also did get decently lucky, especially against Kill Switch, I think. So sorry, Kill Switch, if you're watching. um, so for my frontline, I run like 2 copies of Schützen, mostly like kind of as a tech against the frontline mirror. What are your thoughts about like putting Schützen in US frontline?
I found it hard to find the spots for it just because there's so many cards that I want to run, like the 164th, the dive bombings, Greyhounds for consistency. Uh, I like to have a full stack of half track, but I found it hard to run that as well. I have been liking Eagle Claws. I love having double Martyr in the deck. So I've struggled to find the space for both Schützens, but it's absolutely an incredible card. I mean, it's really good against Jagro, really good against frontline, um, and it can really blow people out and warp how people are forced to play against your deck as well.
Yeah, definitely. If they're like wary, think twice about pushing stuff into the front line, that could buy you some time. I think otherwise my deck is like mostly a meta list, so just wanted to get your thoughts on that. So thank you for that. For self damage, I know that like previously, before Brother in Arms, I think you played a lot of self damage, right? So you have quite a fair amount of experience on self damage. Would it be correct to say that?
Yeah.
All right, so like self damage also I feel like is fairly tight on card slots. Do you think there's a couple of cards that like sometimes people cut and sometimes people run. What are your thoughts on like stand together and counter offensive in the deck?
Um, so I think at least one copy of Stand Together is quite good. I think a lot of times you're able to also get away with, trading with the 34th guards to get it down to like, two or one defense and then stand together. That can really blow somebody out. Um, Additionally, um, what's the name of the card that you get from Stand Together when you play it on 34th guards?
The
Do you remember?
KV. Let's pull it up. Oh wait, that's not the right. Right, it's not a KV. It's the 7 cost.
Yeah,
No,
seven
no,
cost 6/4, heavy armor 2, cannot be pinned.
and now it'd be. Oh, I don't even have any copies of it. Is this one right?
uh, oh yes, 6/5 rather. Yeah, and it's not really a card that you'd play on its own. Um,
Hmm.
but it's really good against Type 94 in Jagro, which is a
Right.
really big deal. Um, and it gets blitz when you use the stand together on it, which is also relevant. That can represent some damage out of nowhere if you need to kill something in the back line or deal full damage to the HQ.
Yeah, like if you
uh
get this in the front line versus Jagro, they can only deal with it like with a Sendai, right? Or like just burning you
yeah,
down.
Sendai or Audacity potentially.
Ah, right, Audacity. Um, Although notably it can't be attacked by any IGs, so they have to like um deal at least some damage with Audacity, maybe like with another IG on board or a Type 93, and then like finish off the remaining HP somehow, which is quite tough since it has heavy armor too.
One thing that I would say about your deck is I would take out the Road to Berlin, um,
Okay.
just because healing is nice, uh, but by the time you have 6/6s in the front line, uh, and you're able to proc the Road to Berlin, you're probably winning anyways, unless you're playing against Jagro, who is close to burning you out. But those situations are rare enough that I think Road to Berlin is a dead card most of the time.
Fair enough. Yeah, I have found that's just really hard to get use out of. Um, Especially like you wouldn't like keep it in your mulligan, right?
I don't think so.
Yeah, so like you also have to like draw it too. If it's in the bottom half of your deck, it could be coming into play quite late. Do you think Island Defense is still worth running? And if so, how many copies?
I think one copy of Island Defense is good, but yeah, I wouldn't go further than that.
Okay. And I don't think we've heard your thoughts on, or have we heard your thoughts on counteroffensive yet?
Um, I can like a copy of Counteroffensive for just a little bit of lethality. I wouldn't mind taking out the Great Patriotic War for it. I
Oh,
haven't been as great of a fan of Great Patriotic War since they removed Ura from the rotation.
okay.
It just lets you, it doesn't let you abuse Great Patriotic War nearly as much.
Right. And also there's less Britons with Commonwealth's threats running around
Yeah.
these days. Okay, fair enough. Well, actually we had a slot open since we took out
It-
wait, what did we take
yeah,
out
that's
again?
true. We
Oh,
took
we
out
rode
Road to
out to
Berlin.
Berlin. Right, right, right. Road to Berlin. Okay, and One more deck. So I've actually seen this played in my group stage, and it did pretty well against me. And I've seen this played in ladder two, and it's U.S. Soviet mid range, kind of like hybrid between U.S. mid range and arty, running the war production and the supply chain. So what are your thoughts on this archetype?
Um, I have had the opportunity to play against it a bit on ladder. Um, and the deck, uh, I feel like it is a little high rolly for my play style. Um, but obviously that is an advantage in some ways, that you are able to start off with a war production and get an anti-tank gun online turn one and just ruin a Jagro's entire day.
Hmm.
Um, but again, if they have Aichi, then that plan isn't so great all of a sudden.
Right.
Um,
Speaking of Aichis, I was even like considering, or actually, I wanted to ask you in general, what do you think like the distribution or like which Soviet arties should I put in this deck? I was thinking of putting the AA gun, but I'm not sure if it's just worth it in the general case. Um,
uh,
yeah,
yeah, I mean, I do like the AA gun. The only issue is that Bloody Sickle is a card, and when you get into those matchups and suddenly you're running a card that's so weak into Bloody Sickle, it can be rough.
definitely,
Um,
especially like if you're already going down on cards from a early war production, which doesn't add any like value to the board. It only has a tempo advantage. You could be running out of cards like very quickly.
yeah, so yeah, I certainly think it's a card worth considering, but I wouldn't really be able to say without, playtesting it myself.
Okay, fair enough. Um, I also run some heavy kind of cards. I don't really think they're like that optimal, but it's just like funny to high roll with like turn 2 P40 if they have no answers. Especially like since there's fewer, I'd say there's fewer air sups and red dawns running around. So I feel a little more comfortable. I still don't think it's like it's probably not optimal, but I think it's funner to just have in the deck. But what are your thoughts on Privateer? This card basically just it feels like a very solid card overall, but it just hasn't really seen play. Like I think maybe like I remember Noen had a deck with this in it, but very
Yeah.
rarely has this seen play.
Um, yeah, I think a 5 cost without guard and without a deployment ability is sort of just riding on the edge of what is like playable. Um, just because, you really want some sort of immediate impact on the board when you play something at 5.
Hmm.
Um, but this is, really pushing the limits of what you can put on the card as well. Because it costs so much to deal with. I mean, if you have to attack 2 things into it, then that's plus 4 credits. They're probably paying 6 credits to deal with it.
Yeah,
Um, so it's the other issue with the card is that sometimes if you play it against something like Jagro, they can just say, okay, that costs too much to kill. I'm just going to hit you in the HQ. And
yeah,
it didn't do anything the turn you played it. So hopefully that 4 damage that you spent 7 credits for next turn is going to be able to save you from dying, which often it won't.
fair enough. Yeah.
Um,
Um, Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I've been testing it out. I'm not sure if it's good yet, like partly for the reasons as you mentioned. Um, I also think island hopping is just really good in this deck because you have so many potential good targets. For example, in regular frontline, you mainly have infantry and tanks, which are like the slowest units in the games. versus in this deck you have RD. Um, Even Skytrain isn't a bad buff target. And of course, if you run Privateer, you have a big boy that costs has heavy armor and +2 credits to target. You think island hopping is a good include?
Yeah, I think the card's pretty nuts with Artie. I actually have a deck that I like to play sometimes, which is US Italy sort of arty with the one cost, one free artillery for Italy that takes a damage if your
Uh,
opponent
that
has
one?
more units. Yeah.
I know what you're
Uh,
talking about. Actually, I played with Corn Guy a while ago, and he mentioned he plays that US Italy RD deck. It's a pretty fun archetype. I haven't tried it myself yet. I might just have to. Um,
yeah, it's pretty similar to this. It's a little more consistent in that it doesn't run the war production supply chain package, although at the same time it doesn't have the blowouts that this deck can have because it doesn't run that package as well. So,
mhm.
a little bit of cost versus reward there.
All right. Sounds good. Last deck I kind of wanted to go over is Japan Poland Legions, actually. I played this a bit on ladder, and I'm not sure if got lucky, but it seemed to like perform pretty well. You have tons of guards. You have the 56 recon, which feels innately like pretty good into Jagro. Um, you can also run the IG package. Um, you got like I have 4 copies of Plan West, which adds 2 legions to your support line, and it seems fairly solid. I mean, obviously Jagro can blow out any deck, but it doesn't seem too bad into the meta. What are your thoughts on the?
Well, I had some scarring experiences playing against what's the sort of new card that is the 2 cost and you make a legions for every card in
Oh, rapid
your opponent can
response.
rapid response. Yeah. Uh and I hate that I have to play around that card now every time I play against this deck on ladder. Um, because it can be so insane. But I've also played with rapid response myself, and I'm not sure how good it is because when you draw it and it's like turn 8, it's like, well, I'm already so limited on the spots in my support line that, even if somebody moves up 4 units, I'd only get 1 or 2 legions out of it. So I don't know how good
Mhm.
the card actually is. But man, when you play Jagro, you get 3 units up to the front line on turn 2 and they rapid response you. Oh my God,
Got
it's such a
him.
blowout. Um, so yeah, I do think this deck is really good. Um, I'm it's strange because this is a deck where you don't see it a ton, but I'm always worried about playing against it.
That's an
Um,
interesting way of putting it.
uh, Maybe I just don't know, the matchup as well. Maybe this deck is underrated. Um, but I always feel like it presents so many issues to deal with. Like the 24th Cavalry making it so hard to take the front line, the Plan Wests making it so you need to take the front line to deal with those legions before they get out of control, the Tarno being a must kill target, Uprising being like a 5k complete board wipe most of the time, like a 5k to the last man.
Hmm.
Um,
And of
it
course, being a Japanese
has
deck, it has the IG package.
Yeah, and the IG package is just overpowered and dumb. um
I was playing a
so yeah.
game where like I won against a Soviet player playing this deck, and I didn't even play a single Polish card. I literally just played the IG package and I won. Because he just couldn't deal with it. That was really funny. Um,
Yeah, I'm very happy to see IG being rotated in
Definitely, yeah.
the upcoming patch.
One thing I wanted to ask is, do you think it's worth running like how much of the traditional Japanese burn late game burn win con that consists of Last Rites, Kawanishi, Kika, and Shiden. Is it Shiden or Shiden?
Shiden.
Shiden. How much of this package do you think is worth running in this deck?
Um, I'm not sure. Everybody who plays the deck seems to be in the same consensus that they run absolutely everything. I'm not sure that you need to run absolutely everything. I feel like maybe the Last Rites package could hurt the consistency a little bit.
That was actually my exact thought. Because first of all, like the Last Rites package is kind of just completely useless against any like aggressive deck. And I found that I played this a decent amount, and I found that even against Soviet Italy control, which theoretically you can't really. I mean, they have a tons of answers to your board, your units. Even then, I feel like it was sometimes like just enough to that I had Shiden and Kika. Like I didn't need the last rites burn to finish them off. So like I felt like even in the situations where it's supposed to be good, it's still not even like necessary to win, if that makes sense.
Yeah, if I was experimenting with this deck, then I would play around with taking out the last strikes and the Kawanishi and seeing if you can run like a little more early game,
Hmm.
perhaps.
Oh yeah, and ignore the double Empire of the Sun. I was just like running into a bunch of discards for like literally no reason, even after Case Yellow. Even like literally right after Case Yellow was nerfed, like I just ran into a bunch of discards for no reason. Like what? Um,
Who
okay.
am I to judge a man for his Empire of the Suns?
All right. So